Welcome everyone. It's May 10th, 2021, and we are having a meeting this evening of the Monterey Bay Chapter of the California Rare Fruit Growers. My name is Carol Golsch, and on the screen right now is Freddie Menge. We got together recently along with Sharon Zoe and spent a little bit of time videotaping a couple of important topics for all of us. The first one being how to thin your fruit trees, and the second being how to trap gophers. I think how to trap gophers is probably a perennial and year-long effort. Thinning trees is probably very appropriate right now. So without further ado, I'm going to ask Freddie to kick off the video, and we'll start our evening with how to thin fruit trees. So we'll have the video, and after that we'll take questions. Take it away, Freddie.
All right. Okay, so yeah, so I think right now I'm just going to talk about reasons why this is a problem. Like, you would think this is great. Look at all the fruit. There's a cluster here, a cluster here, here, here. It's wonderful, but too much of a good thing is not so good. I mean, if I were to let all these fruits ripen, it would be probably more than 30 fruit in a 6-inch space. And what that would do is leave too few leaves, provision sugar to make the fruits good or to size up. The fruits would be too close together. They would push each other off the stems when they ripen, but they'd also leave crevices and protected areas where codling moth can lay their eggs, and where they can act as nursery for apple worm maggots to infiltrate your fruit, and you'll always have more codling moth damage if you leave your fruit trees unthinned. So that's the first sort of most basic aspect. The secondary effects are also really important. If I don't thin my tree, I leave the fruit this dense, then I run the risk of messing up the tree's physiology. It's actually keeping records. It doesn't care. It's actually pretty cheap to make fruit. It counts the seeds because the seeds are built from protein, from nitrogen, and they're physiologically expensive for the tree to produce. And so it keeps a count. And when its seed count exceeds a certain level, it says to itself, okay, no one's really taking care of me. I've got to conserve my resources. I am going to cut back on provisioning new flower bud formation for next season. So what you'll have is a year where you have thousands of tiny fruit in your tree. Those fall out to be disgusting, sour, and astringent things. And the next year you'll have nothing. And maybe the next year after that, you might have nothing. But then the tree sort of recovers and will produce another bumper crop of junk fruit. And you'll have this kind of, they call it biennial bearing cycle. And that's what you want to avoid if you're an orchardist. Another reason you want to thin your fruit is that if you leave a small number of fruits on your tree, say instead of a couple thousand, I want to thin this tree to something like 60 or 70 fruit. Those can attain good size and they're sweet, but also if I leave just a few fruit on the tree, it can partition more energy toward vegetative growth, and so I won't stunt my tree as much. I can prevent or stop vegetative growth or advancement of my growing of my tree if I allow it to make too much fruit. It just overburdens it and I can't support it, and it puts all of its root mass capacity into finishing that fruit and none of it into growing more tree. So we talked about thinning. So thinning these things, I want to carefully thin my fruit. Which one do I take off? How do you start? Okay, so I know, and how many do you want to leave? I like to leave my fruit like 6 inches apart. I like a 6-inch space, and I'll go 6 inches down the branch. So if these things are 4 inches as the codling moth flies, it's 8 inches as the beetle walks. So I'll leave one out here. This is a little bit in the sun. If it was in a really bad location, I might reconsider that and try to select select fruit that were on the other side of the branch where the leaves can shade it and protect it from getting. And so I'm snapping this fruit off at the stem and leaving the spur intact and trying to not ravage the leaves that are support the rest of the fruit on the tree. And so I took this spur, I removed all the fruit. This one, I removed all the fruit. This one, I'll leave a single king fruit. I'm selecting for that center fruit. These ones on the underside are too close. But they're in a good position. There's a nice big one down here. I'm actually gonna take that one off. So I've reduced this congestion of fruit from 30 down to 2. So I've got 2 fruit in here and they're nicely spaced and they'll get to be beautiful, big, ripe, nice fruit. And I just have to do my whole orchard. I've got about 800 trees and I throw 400 flowers on the ground or 1,000 flowers on the ground and keep 40 to 100 fruit. So.
No, it's okay. Nothing wrong.
Okay, so having just listened to what we were talking about with the apples, you might be tempted to thin your cherries. And generally people don't thin cherries in our area. They usually don't set heavy enough to be a problem. But they can be a problem. Like if it were to rain when these got bigger, there would be quite a bit of contact between these fruits. And where they touch, you might get something like that, which is maybe brown. It's some kind of, rot from contact or moisture. And I, in my orchard, I just sort of wait and see, and I don't proactively thin my cherries because it doesn't usually seem to be a huge problem. Rule of thumb, don't thin your cherries. They're probably not ever going to bear that many anyway. Okay, so now that brings us to pear trees, and pears are a little bit of a different issue. Like they can make a lot of bloom. This thing was covered in bloom 2 weeks ago, and it's coming out of bloom, and it's got lots of clusters very close together. Some of the fruit spurs have more than one fruit on it, but generally people don't thin pears for a couple of reasons. One is the shape. They're long and they're thin at the neck, so they can kind of hang on the tree. They hang down and they don't push one another off. But also they have a tendency to self-thin. And if you look at these clusters already so far, even just a week out of bloom, they're already loosening up, and a lot of these flowers, what were flowers, are falling off. I'm bouncing around.
On this one.
Yeah, so they're falling off by themselves. So, and I notice this process continues through the season for quite a while, for at least until into July or June. It'll continue to abscise, select for healthier fruit, and drop off ones that aren't as well connected. So I don't mess with it. I don't do this. I don't go around and knock those dead flowers off. I don't pull fruit off, except for possibly Seckle. Seckle is a small pear. We should cut and go look at for a Seckle tree. So that kind of brings us to plums, peaches, apricots. Do they need thinning? How should you thin? Like this tree is not really ready to thin, so I can't demonstrate. It's just on the edge of declaring who's going to stay and who's not going to stay. But with our peaches, we've already thinned, and we're extremely brutal in the thinning process. We don't let a peach go closer than 4 inches apart, 3 inches apart, 4 inches apart. You figure a peach you want to thin, give them a good space in between. If you see 2 peaches touching, one's got to go. Take the worst peach off of there. And If you leave too many peaches on, they don't attain the sugar, they don't attain the quality, the tree suffers, the leaf curl will have more of an impact. It just lightens the load and you get much better fruit. Now, we've never personally had to thin our apricot tree. It's never set heavy enough and consistently enough, throughout the tree to merit thinning. So we leave that untouched, but some of our plums are productive enough that they have congested fruit, and we have to separate the fruit by, maybe, what's the rule of thumb, twice the diameter of the finished fruit. What's the finished fruit? Is it a 2-inch fruit? Leave 4 inches apart, and that'll, if you do that, you'll still have a lot of fruit in your tree, and it'll size up, get full sugar and full flavor, and the tree will just be happier.
In the video, what questions do you have about what came up? You're welcome to put them in the chat box, or if you prefer, you can just unmute yourself and speak your question.
I've got a question.
Go ahead, Freddie.
Okay, what about the gopher catching? Should we do the gopher catching after we talk about thinning a little bit, or?
Yes, let's do the thinning discussion first, and then we'll get to the gopher one, I think. Okay. So Carol Peck is asking, what is the thinning recommendation for citrus? That's a great question, Carol, because I'm looking at my baby citruses and wondering the same thing. Ready?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think the fundamentals of thinning are that the closer the fruit is, the more you dilute the sugar, the capacity to ripen the fruit on the tree. So if you have 1,000 fruit on the tree, you're going to get way lower quality fruit than if you have 100 fruit on the tree, and that applies to whatever you're growing. And so citrus, it's no exception. I think it's really important to thin your citrus, especially in our climate. It tends to flower really densely, and you can usually overset. So we pull a lot of fruit off, and 2 to 3 inches apart for a mandarin, or even maybe a little bit more than that for a navel orange is a good rule of thumb. If you don't, you'll get clusters, and it may disrupt the growth of your tree. You leave too much fruit, maybe it won't be quite so good. Citrus seems like it's fairly flexible. It can handle a lot of fruit. It can still ripen it pretty well, but it'll always be better and bigger and juicier if you thin it, a little bit.
Now, Freddie, at what time point would you choose to thin the citrus? As an example, I'm looking at mine right now, and I can see that the flower is done, and there's an itsy bitsy piece of fruit like the size of a pea, maybe. Should I wait a little longer to see which ones are viable, or do I go ahead right now and, trust to luck?
Yeah, is it really time consuming to thin? So I tend to wait a little bit to see if things are going to turn yellow and drop off. And if they'll do that by themselves, I let them do that. I would way rather not intervene and put in the effort to thin them. So let it grow up a little bit, let it, double pea size or something, and then see what it's going to do. If they're going to stick, if they're double pea size and they're still congested, then you have to go in and pull fruit off.
Great.
And
Great.
And
does that vary based on the age of the tree? As an example, with mine, they just got planted this last fall. So would you thin more heavily with such young ones or not?
Yes, of course. Yes, I would thin more heavily with young trees, as those young branches are often not strong enough to support a load of fruit. So use, be conservative and let your tree frame up. Let it get to, don't pull all the fruit. I don't feel like, oh, I have to pull all the fruit off for 5 years. Just don't let it overload itself and they'll break branches. They'll snap under the gravity. So.
Michelle is asking, it seems like you were thinning when they were very small. Is there a best time to thin?
Great question. I forgot to talk about that on the video. a lot of people thin when the apples are ping pong ball or golf ball size, and by that time, the seeds inside have already formed and they've already begun secreting the hormone that tells the tree to shut off its flower formation for the next season. So the earlier you thin with almost everything, the less of a biennial effect you'll have. And so, I mean, yeah, so if you actually are really on it, you can thin your fruit just at the stage that I was thinning it. That's the way I like to do it. You'll get a bumper crop this year, and that tree will have so few seeds on that tree, so little of that suppressant hormone that it's secreting, that it will continue to form bumper crops year after year. You'll get essentially the same harvest weight. Your crop weight will be essentially equivalent between a thin tree and an unthin tree, but your thin tree will be distributed among big, beautiful, sweet, flavorful fruit versus crappy, small, useless fruit. And your tree will do it every year and not every 1 out of 3 or 1 out of 2 years. Right. I'm done.
If I can add to that, Freddie, I've noticed, because I did a little thinning, I don't know, maybe a week ago, right after we made the video, and I did some more thinning today, and it was much harder to thin this week, much harder to wrestle the fruit off without damaging the spur, without knocking off the king fruit, etc. So I noticed a huge difference in the strength of the little stems. And so
Yes.
I got a good lesson out of that, because now my thumbnails are totally shattered. So for any of us who are concerned about our thumbnails, thin early, thin often. Let's see. Sharon is asking, when you said 4-inch spacing for plums, are you talking about 4-inch center to center or 4-inch edge to edge?
I think center to center.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, 4 inches is that's a lot. That would be that would leave you with really market grade big plums. But you know, if you thin it 4 inches center to center, that's probably really only 1.5 inches between finished fruit, and that's enough for them not to make contact. If you fail to thin your plums, and in a lot of things to the point where they're touching as they ripen in our foggy climate, you'll get or dew condensing in that contact zone, and that will often lead to a rotten, you'll think you have a ton of plums on that tree, but they'll be rotting where they're making contact. You'll lose a big proportion of them. So
good to know.
That's, yeah.
Okay, so Greg is saying his apple trees are in the stage when they had a great crop last year, but hardly any fruit on them this year. Can he improve his chances of getting fruit next year in some way?
He's already set up to make a lot of fruit for next year, just by the fact that the tree is conserving all its energy. It's going to put it all into vegetative growth. I don't know how much fruit he has. It might still be a good idea, just for quality of fruit, to thin some of the clusters that are there, so that maybe you don't have to separate them by 6 inches, since there's not much fruit on the tree. But if the clusters were thinned to a single fruit, then you'd get nice quality fruit. They'd be very big, and you'd have a better chance of making a ton of fruit next year.
Right, great. Rachel is asking if you could please explain a little more how you decide which of the apples to actually thin. I think she means out of that cluster.
Yeah, okay, so I talked about the king apple, and that's the center of the cluster. It's the first bloom, the first flower to actually open in a cluster of apples will be the center one, and then the 5 to 6 peripheral blooms will open a little bit later. But that first flower, that center flower, is usually provisioned better. It's got more strength than the side blooms, and you'll often be able to see a difference in the stem, the size of the stem. Now, sometimes it happens that that stem or that center flower doesn't develop, it doesn't get pollinated, and it falls off. You don't have a center. So then you just look for the thickest stem, the biggest one, the best looking one, and you break off the other ones. Don't spend a lot of time doing that. It's kind of a quick assessment. You go, so, oh yeah, there's 5 apples. There's one that's kind of big. You don't have to weigh them or measure them or anything. Sorry.
That's okay. All right, Kristen is asking about quince trees. Any advice on thinning for quince? Are they more like apples or pears or something else? Our fruit aren't growing in clusters, but in lines along the branch.
Yeah, then I just think spacing them reasonably is a good idea. And look at your tree. I mean, there's a little bit of subjectivity to, you thin an apple but not a pear. Really, if fruit is the most dwarfing effect you can impart on a fruit tree. So if your quince is strong with excess vigor, thin less. If it's weak and you want to grow more, then thin harder.
Patricia Evans is asking if Asian pears should be managed similarly to European. Her Asian pear sets more heavily than her European one.
Yeah, I've seen Asian pears just cover their stems so densely that they can't size them up. So I think if your Asian pear is setting fruit really densely and you've got contact between your fruit, it's a good idea to thin. You'll get much better fruit.
Now, pardon me if I don't have the name correct, but it looks like Esther Northville is asking, where can one find the little bags to place on apples to prevent codling moth access? And when is the best time to place these bags over the apples?
Probably online. I don't use them, so I don't know. Maybe someone out there knows.
Okay, if anybody has ideas, why don't you drop them into the chat? But I think maybe one point to take away from our discussion is that because we're proposing to thin to only one fruit in a cluster, there's really not much space for the codling moth larva to hang out and make a home for itself. Is that right, Freddie?
Well, they can actually just go straight to work if they're there. But I think if you have a single fruit on a single cluster, like if you really want to use those bags to exclude codling moth, you have to put the bags on pretty shortly after you thin, kind of almost at the same time. Because that's when the codling moth, the first generation of codling moth in the spring will attack. It actually is triggered by springtime temperatures, basically when it's 62 degrees at sundown or higher, you'll have codling moth flying, mating, laying eggs. So if you reach those temperatures, then you're going to have codling moth larvae and eggs deposited on your apples. There's things that eat the codling moth if they can get to them, and you increase your chances of having codling moth free fruit by thinning and not leaving those niches for them, but still they can find a way to get in. So if you're going to use the bags, do it early.
Great. Greg is coming back to us with a subsequent question. On the trees where I had lots of fruit last year, and this year hardly any, except for the branches that I grafted onto the tree this year, can I leave more fruit in these clusters since there are hardly any other apples on the tree?
Yeah, I mean, you can, yeah, it's a good idea to thin less heavily, you know, in the sections where you have fruit, if most of the tree doesn't have any fruit on it. Yeah, that's fine. But it's the kind of the total number of fruit on the tree that makes the difference. So, but you still have the other issues of congestion and, you know, how much contact, like sometimes you still have to thin a little bit to get good fruit. Otherwise, there'll be 7 fruit on or 5 fruit on in a cluster, and they'll push themselves off.
Alexei is asking, wants to make sure he understood that you should thin the apples when they're about pea size.
Yeah, pea size is great. Pea size to marble size.
And Alexei, I hope we've explained now what a king fruit is, but again, it's the center fruit in the cluster. And typically the first one to have flowered and become the fruit and sort of the largest. Although I will say that today in working on my trees, I found it hard to tell. So I just made my best guess.
That works too.
Let's see, Jenny is wondering, do you also thin almonds?
I don't grow almonds. I don't thin them. I don't, you know, like maybe almonds fall in the same category as cherries. Like cherries, you never make, cherries rarely make a big crop here. So when you get a good crop, you don't thin them and you assume that the next year you're going to have an off year, but you just take the good year where you can get it because it doesn't happen very often.
Yes.
Almonds.
Yeah, we pulled out our almond trees. Yeah, just wasn't any point in it. Let's see, Alexei says he's found those mesh bags on Amazon. So Alexei, if you remember what the search term was that you used, pop it in the text, please. Mateo is asking about avocados. Says he assumes that avocados are the exception for thinning. They flower extremely heavily, but even in high yield years, the fruit always seems to be spaced appropriately. What do you think about that, Freddie?
We've got some ridiculous fruit loads on our avocados this year, and I didn't thin them. I didn't thin. Ellen wants to thin the avocados. I don't. We'll see who's right. But generally, the avocados are generally biennial bearing, and it's hard not to have them biennial bear. So even by thinning, you might increase the fruit size of your avocados, but I don't do it. I don't thin. I don't know anyone who thins their avocados.
Okay. Let's see, Paul is asking about his tangerine. His tangerine is alternate bearing. Right now, it is ending a heavy bloom. Should he thin?
Yes. Yeah, that might be exactly what's wrong with it. You know, the congestion of too many seeds.
Hey, Mark is asking, is there a pest like a codling moth that gets in through the flower before fruit forms? And is there any way to detect this when deciding which fruit to remove?
The codling moth, I mean, he's saying, is there something like the codling moth?
Yeah,
or I mean, the codling moth is
that
usually,
you're able to tell from the flower that it's as it were, it's already been attacked, and you should remove that one.
yeah, I mean, usually you can, usually when you're, at the time you're thinning, if you're thinning early, the codling moth hasn't attacked the apple yet. And although there's all kinds of pests on the tree, there's, you know, there's light brown apple moth, there's leaf rollers, there's case borers, there's various caterpillars that will actually eat into the surface of the young, very young fruit clusters right after bloom. And it's pretty common to see apples half eaten or quarter eaten. And yeah, you should be conscious of that. That's a possibility. Look at, you know, just well, a glancing look will tell you that it's got a huge bite out of it or it's turning yellow. You should be, assessing the quality. As an apple is about to fall off, if it's damaged in that young cluster, it'll turn pale or yellowish before it finally drops. And so you don't want to be leaving the yellowish apples, or whatever you're thinning, the yellowish, that paleness. Cherries are the same way. I mean, you're not thinning cherries, but whatever you're thinning, pears yellow as they drop. So if you're going to thin your pears, be careful. Don't thin the pale ones. Don't select for the pale ones. Those are about to go.
Molly wants to share that Peaceful Valley Farm carries the bags for codling moth, and that their URL is groworganic.com. Thank you, Molly.
Great.
Alexa gives us a big yes, thank you, and provided a link for some that he bought a couple years back. So folks, if you're looking for more information on that, there's an Amazon link in the chat window from Alexa. Michelle is wondering about thinning persimmons. Can you address that, Freddie? Do you do persimmons?
Yeah, I mean, I think the same rules apply. You can break branches with persimmons. You can have undersized fruit with persimmon, with overbearing persimmon tree. My Saijo, is a young tree, and I didn't think it would hold all this fruit. We made a ton of fruit last year, and I actually snapped branches. So yeah, the same rules, the same fundamentals apply. The weight of the fruit will affect those branches. The quantity of the fruit will determine how much sugar is in each fruit. And the more fruit you leave on that tree, the less vegetatively vigorous it will grow. And the exact same fundamentals apply to persimmons. Sure.
Irene has got a good question for us. She's wondering what to do with damaged or infected fruits. And I suppose maybe I'll add into that damaged leaves, like ones with aphids. Should they be put in the compost bin, or should they be wrapped, or what would you do with damaged or infected fruits, or perhaps leaves?
Yeah, well, I mean, a little later in the season, it'll be easy to see codling moth damaged fruits on the trees as they, as they size up, as they get to ping pong ball size. You can often, see the brown sort of scurf on the outside of the hole, and it's a good idea to pull those off. If you have the time, go through your orchards and just pull that, wormy fruit off and put it in a black plastic bag and set it in the sun. You can cook it, or otherwise you run, if you throw it on the ground, that worm has a good chance of maturing into an adult and another generation of breeding adults that'll lay more codling moth eggs later on. So, I mean, solarizing in a black plastic bag is one thing that works, but there's a lot of ways. You could bury it deep too, a foot down or something. That would be fine, but throw it in the green waste. I don't know.
Michelle adds that she uses paper craft bags that she buys at a craft store to bag her fruit while it's on the tree. Good idea, Michelle. Does that seem to have any effect on letting the fruit color up towards the end of the season? Michelle, I'm kind of wondering, do you remove the paper craft bags at some point?
I remove the bags when I harvest. I don't take them off before, and they usually come out perfect.
Great to know. All right. Thank you so much. Okay, Alexei is curious about his mulberry trees. Any ideas on how to make his mulberries produce more fruit?
I don't know what his trees look like. It's I guess I don't know. I mean, I don't know enough information, and it might be a little bit beyond the scope of what we're talking about.
So Alexei, what you might want to do is, post a photo and a couple questions on our Facebook page, or send it to our mailing list. And, you know, various people who are familiar with mulberries doubtless will be happy to chime in on that topic. So
You
send us
bet.
some pictures. You know, everybody's always interested in mulberries. All right, that looks like we've come to the end of the questions in the chat window. Are there any other questions about thinning fruit? I would just like to share one observation from my fruit thinning experience of the last couple days. Several of my trees are standard trees, not dwarf. And so in order to thin them, I have to climb up on the ladder to do that. And what I discovered was that you don't want to have to reach to get to the fruit, because what happened to me is I ended up snapping off the little branches. So get down and move the ladder. You'll be safer and you probably won't break the branches. So coming back to Mark's question, he always thought that worms in apples have exit holes, not entry holes, because they formed in flower. Is that true?
I didn't hear the question. Was that, are you asking me? I was still digging out.
Mark is asking, I always thought that worms in apples have exit holes, not entry holes, because they formed in the flower. True or not true?
Not true. They go in, the thing's really small, and then they come out.
Okay, very good. All righty. Well, now we are going to switch over to our next topic.
I'm Freddie. I'm going to trap some gophers today.
Tell us what you got in your hand, Freddie.
This is a Gophinator trap. It's an all stainless steel upgrade of the traditional, probably the 50-year standard McAfee trap that most would use forever. That McAfee trap got maybe pushed out of the limelight by the cinch trap when that came on 15, 20 years ago. But this is a really nice trap in that it takes the simple McAfee design and translated into an all stainless steel construction. It doesn't rust, corrode, or deteriorate with time. Okay, so this is the Gophinator trap, completely set, ready to put in a hole. I've got it tied to a wire, tied to a pipe. I put the pipe down. I can always see the pipe in the field. I know where my traps are. The gopher doesn't pull it down the hole. It's great. But so this is completely set, and
Your sound went out, Freddie. Did you mute yourself?
so this is the Gophinator trap once it's been sprung. Looks like this. It's kind of confused.
Carol, you muted
I put
me.
the pipe down. I can always
Yes, I
see the
know.
pipe in the field. I know where my trap is.
You're good now, though.
Down the hole. Great. But, so this is completely set, and I want to demonstrate how to set it. So I'm going to unset it. So I'm going to pretend I'm a gopher. And I usually push my way through here, and it's off. And okay, pause. So this is the Gophinator trap once it's been sprung. Looks like this. It's kind of confusing mess of wires. First thing you do is you release the spring. This is this coil spring. Okay, so this spring, once the trap is sprung, it looks like that. And to release the tension, you just unhook this little spring. And so this spring also controls the arm. And so you open up the trap, so the neck of the trap is open, and you lift this arm up. And the funny thing about this is it doesn't fit if you just lift it straight up. It doesn't go through there. It only goes through if you run the stick through on the diagonal. It's just short enough to pass through that gap. And so now you've got it up here. You take that jaw, open it up a little bit, and put that little leg over the top of the jaw to hold it down. And then you put the trigger over the end of the leverage stick. And so that holds it. So now you can turn this, and if I had this released, if it was completely released, if I did this, it would just turn the head. But pinning it down, boom, holding that down, holding that down. I hold this down so I don't accidentally set it off in my hands. And then I take my fingers, turn it and spin it around like that. And it's got a bit of tension in that spring. Sometimes it's tough if you're
There's
not
some left.
grabbing it in the right
Yeah, a
way.
little bit.
It's difficult, but if you reach around the back and
Take
pull
most of it though.
the right direction, and it's pretty easy to get it onto that, hook it around the shaft. So then you let that go, and that's ready to catch a gopher. So here's the trap after it's been sprung. If you don't have a gopher in it anymore, you pull the gopher out, it looks like this. And it's a little bit confusing, and it's also kind of counterintuitive because this is the important thing, but it's not really engaged unless you open that jaw up and you put this little leg over the top of the jaw, and then this little U flips down and it holds it in place. So now when I turn the spring, it doesn't do anything. And I'm going to release that and show you what it does if it's not hooked up right. It just doesn't do anything. You can do this and it's just a mess. It's a mess of wire and it's really frustrating. And people get really angry at this trap. But little leg over that, the U over that, and then you grab this spring from the back side. You reach your hand around underneath, grab with your forefinger. My fingernails are pretty dirty too. I've been digging in the dirt. And hook that on. So I'm going to do that again because this is hard. People complain this trap is a little bit hard to set because the spring has got a lot of tension on it. So you reach around the back side, so your arms like this, and then you can use your whole body to leverage that in place. And this little leg right here is what controls the trigger. Oops. Yeah. Okay, so finding a gopher hole, you want to find a gopher hole with really fresh dirt. With the freshest dirt you can find, it'll often be more moist underneath than it is up top. And then if it's not already open, with your shovel, you dig down after it a little bit. No, it's pretty dry down there. It's still open, right? Oh, it's tough. Okay, so then you end up at the bottom of a hole, and there's often a feel around that perimeter. It's not always evident where the hole is, where the opening is, but this is soft dirt in here, and I'm just following that. So I follow that as far as I can reach. I can't go any farther, so I'll just dig another spoonful. Still chasing, and I'll dig as far as I need to go. At some point, usually they plug in a hole, a few inches. Sometimes it's a foot. Sometimes it's even more. I don't mind going a foot. Yeah. Way down and it came back up, and now it's open.
And it took a turn to the side.
Yeah, big turn. Actually, it branched. It went this way too. Oh yeah, both directions.
Not sure if we're going to see anything.
So we've got the set trap. It's ready to go. I've got the hole excavated out. It actually went two directions, out this way and that way. I'm going to set the bottom, kind of the most difficult one first. And first thing I do is I hold my trigger. This is the trigger. Gopher hits that with his nose, pushes it this way, releases this. This spins up, that closes, pinches the gopher, and he dies. Hold that down with your thumb. You don't want that happening to your finger. And another cautionary thing, this, when it spins around, has a lot of power and it's a little sharp hook, and so it can rip your skin apart too. So if you hold this down, there's no chance of this trap accidentally going off while you're sticking it in the hole. So I hold that down while I'm setting it, and I just kind of work it into the hole. And I think there's 5 different sizes this trap comes in. I've used 3 of them. There's a very small one that is suitable for a real small gopher. and the huge ones for those main runs. And that's pretty good. That's in there. I'm gonna pull the trigger back. You don't have to do this, but and it's dangerous to do it too far. If you accidentally pull the trigger back too much, it'll go off and damage your finger. But by pulling the trigger back a little bit, sets it on a hair trigger, and will go off easy. So that's one trap. And this one, let me just turn this one and set this one. Okay, so that's pretty good. The deeper in the holes, the better. These are not very deep. I can't get very deep on that. I like to put, they say you don't need to bait these, but I always have better luck when I bait a trap. These are kind of rotten apples from last year's harvest. You're supposed to get rid of these and throw them out of your orchard, but if you didn't get that memo, they make great gopher bait. And so set that in here. The gopher will bring his nose up, trying to get that apple, even when it tastes like a little bit like applesauce vinegar, and push the lever, set off the trigger, and he's yours. Yeah. So after you set the trap, you've got the bait is optional. Works better with the bait, but after you've got the bait in there, trap set, leave the hole open. Don't cover it up. And the gopher will come and investigate. They'll open hole. They sometimes will try to fill the hole, and that's a good thing because they'll start pushing dirt in there and they'll set off the trigger and it'll get up. So, and then you just wait. When the traps are set this shallowly, you can actually see from the outside whether the gopher's been caught. But normally you can't tell with an opening trap until you pull it out. But, and that's the benefit of the cinch trap. This is, oh yeah, so coming back the next day, you take a look. And oh yeah, here we go. There's a gopher. It's a pretty good kill. Got him in the middle. Not too terrible. You take the gopher out, grab the trap right here with your thumb and forefinger. Remove that spring. Take that spring and spin it around. That opens the jaws. And I like to put my gophers back in the hole. Bury it up. What? Well, gophers don't like dead bodies in their burrows, and so it will move gophers, another gopher. It will dissuade a gopher from using that burrow in the near future. They also make good fertilizer. You can put them on your trees, but coyotes smell them and dig them up.
There's a cinch trap. And the way you would set it is, it has several pieces. Basically, you want to first go this direction and then that direction and then back up. So it's like 3 sides of a square. So this piece is the hardest, and you want to make sure, since it snaps back that way, you want to keep your hand on the side of the trigger piece so you don't get injured. You get this back here. And then you put the second piece over the first piece. And then the third piece going that way. And now you push the trigger down. And now it's set. So a few things to be aware of. You want the pieces to go as far as possible to make the trigger as short as possible. And this is especially important in the last part. You want this piece, this right now horizontal piece, to be pushed up against that. And then you want the last piece to be there. And then after you set this, so now the gopher is going to stick its nose there, and then this will close and break its neck. So once you have the set into a hole, as you handle it, you put it in the safest position. But once you set it into a hole, it'll look like this. This will probably be about where the ground is, and this is out of the ground that you could see. You want to set this to be as short of a trigger as possible. So you want to back this up
No,
until it can almost trigger on its own. So
I think he was still
can
in
you
the
see
front.
how short of a trigger this is? This is the key. This makes the trap really, really sensitive. And it does happen that as I'm working around it, it gets set off sometimes. So then as you set it into the hole, into the tunnel, say like this will be sticking out. Then most people, so the tunnel's going this way and it's open here. And then some people will set a warning flag. It's just a piece of wire with a flapping piece of fabric. So the key is to not set the flag in the same direction. Because if you set the flag in the same direction, then you have a colorful flag flopping around in the wind that even a gopher with its poor vision can see the color and movement and be more alarmed. So you want to set your flag to go like this, where the flag is flapping out of sight of the gopher. So when you caught a gopher, the trigger will be up in the air like this. Okay, and if you didn't catch it, but the trap just set off on its own or a gopher tripped it, it'll be like this. So this is how you can just, if you set a bunch of traps, you could just walk by and see, oh, there's probably a gopher in there, or there isn't a gopher, or in this position, nothing has happened yet. So sometimes these pieces can get caught. So like when I set the first piece, I need to check that this can move, because sometimes it does get caught. And then the same thing goes here. It doesn't take much strength to hold it. Yeah. So just check that it can move, and then have this go as far that way as possible. And then once again, have this go as far that way as possible.
Laura is saying that a great way to deter gophers is to plant iris grown from rhizomes, bearded iris, not bulbs, Dutch iris. The rhizomes don't taste or smell good to gophers. It's interesting to know. They protect my veggie beds and fruit trees. Once the iris were planted, the gophers moved to my neighbor's yards. The iris has also saved your fingers. Okay, I want to know more about your fingers, Carol. I don't understand why that worked, but that is great because I need to divide my irises again this year, and they're going down to the orchard, man. Patricia is wondering how to tell if she has gophers or moles.
Moles usually have they push a little tunnel up. They're very shallow generally, and they work near the surface, and you can usually see a little hump where their burrows are. They kind of push the dirt up as they work, and
as opposed to making a single mound, right? Like it would be a
yeah, right.
Yeah.
I mean, moles can also make a mound. They can also excavate, but if you investigate that excavation, the mole hole will be along the surface and the gopher will go down deeper. That's a basic way to tell.
And can you use these same
And-
traps and techniques for moles, Freddie?
Oh, Sharon, do you have something to say?
Yes, another way to tell, how do I get this on the video? Another way to tell, can I get this?
Oh, we can see you, Sharon. We can
Can you see?
Yeah,
Oh,
they
I cannot see. Okay. So with the gopher, the hole,
We can't see that, Sharon. You
Yeah,
have to
it's
describe
like,
that.
it's too small. It's,
okay,
It's too small. It's too faint.
it's not gonna
okay.
work.
okay. So a gopher mound would be like a horseshoe or a crescent shaped, with the plug being on one side of the round
Right.
mound, whereas a mole hole, you'll have the plug being right in the middle, looking more like a volcano.
Sure. Yeah, so it's a different shape. It tends to be a little bit different shape excavation, where a gopher will tend to have its hole on one side and push the dirt out in one direction. But, not always, but
And-
tend to.
And what is it if it's just a hole in the ground? I have lots of just holes in the ground, no dirt excavation.
That usually means gopher, because that's a gopher coming up and feeding,
Okay,
or a breathing hole. Yeah.
okay.
But ground squirrel will have no mound, but just holes, right?
Well, they'll make dirt too, but it'll be big. It'll be much bigger.
Okay.
But yeah.
Let's see. So Carol is clarifying for us that when she sets the traps for gophers, sometimes her fingers get caught in the trap, and that's why she made the comment previously about the irises protecting her fingers. So as someone who also has trouble with manipulating these objects, I'm really excited about the iris information. I think that's great stuff. Okay, let's see. Rachel has also had experience with the gopher hawk trap. Rachel, would you like to unmute and tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, sorry, I'll just get the video on real quick here, if I can. So the gopher hawk trap is is a completely different looking, sorry, I can't get my video, there it goes. It's a completely different looking trap. It's about roughly 2 feet in length.
Welcome to the Rusted Garden. Today is January 17th, 2018, and this is a comprehensive video that shows you every single step of starting tomatoes and peppers indoors, taking them outside, getting them in the ground, and taking care of them to full harvest. This is a 9-part series.
Go ahead, please.
Okay, and it's like kind of like a little, like maybe roughly 1.5 inch, a cylinder, and it has a spring that you know, they all have springs, I guess, but it has like these 3 little stainless steel like little trip levers at the bottom, and when you'll find they give you a little, like a poker, like a little thing, a metal rod to poke to find the holes, and you supposedly you're not supposed to even have to shovel. I usually do, but you find where the run is, and then you just down it. It may only be like 6 inches deep, and you put this bottom part of this trap in to that little opening. And what's really good about it is that if you don't have strong hands, or you're afraid of your hand getting snapped with those other type of traps, this one is really good because you don't have to get your hand anywhere near the area where the trap part is, and it's not anywhere near as it's effective, but it's not anything near as, it's not like a spring-loaded type like those other, like the cinch trap. It has a little spike that shoots down the cylinder that shoots down when the gopher trips it, and it basically just kind of comes straight down and spikes through their neck or wherever it gets them. But I really highly recommend it. They're a little pricey. They're like around $30, but they're really easy to use, relatively speaking, at least I find, and quite effective.
Good to know, Rachel. Good to know. Freddie or Sharon, have you had experience with the gopher hook?
Sharon?
I have seen it used. I have not used it myself.
Yeah, I've not used it myself, but I've, my brother bought one and I looked at it and it looks good. It looks, effective. That's a lot of money, $30, boy. I have a dozen traps out in my orchard where.
Well, if you're trying to save, I mean, like I'll have trees that are 7 years old, and I feel like, okay, you keep reusing them over and over and over and over. And so in the end, it's like it's saving you if you're able to effectively use it, whichever tool you can effectively use. But for me, I can effectively use it. So it's saving me like losing 7 or whatever year old trees.
Sure.
So, Bob, sorry, go ahead, Sharon.
Oh, can I add a few things that I had left it out making the video?
Please.
So cinch trap comes in 3 different sizes: small, medium, and large. For gophers in California, medium is the main size to use. Small is for moles, which I probably will not kill. Large is for gophers like on the East Coast. And the other thing that I like about the cinch trap is this is the part that snaps the gopher's neck. This is where the trigger is. And I could do all the work that I need to do really far away from where the gopher would be. And so I could release the dead gopher without having to touch the dead gopher. I am a little squeamish. And the way I would release it is if it's caught like, if it's caught like this, I'll keep it caught in the trap and I'll shove it into the tunnel. And then pull this to release it. I always rebury the gopher. Oftentimes when I remember, I also do a small ceremony, but it's a way for the gopher to be recycled to earth and back to plants again. And when I first learned to trap gophers, when I had a chance to spend time at a farm, I saw the amount of damage that the gophers can do. Mainly, they take out the means of production. So they eat the whole, say, tomato start, or they chew up the root of a tree, so the tree dies, right? It's different than just sharing our harvest. Anyway, I decided that if I'm going to do it, I'm going to learn to do it well. That was how I started just practicing. And I do find that with the cinch trap, I don't have strong hands. I've had repetitive strain injuries, and I'm able to set it without hurting my hand. So that, and the fact that I don't have to touch the gopher, I like. Thank you.
If I could, hey, this is Mark Moscow. If I could just throw in, usually for the cinch trap, I find the safest way to set them is to set it down on a hard surface like the ground. So there's the only thing that's moving is the spring mechanism, and you don't have the whole trap trying to, tumble around in your hands.
Very cool. Very cool. Nice. I'm feeling bad that I didn't try my hands with both of the styles of traps when we were doing the video. Now I feel like an idiot, but Oh, well, I will have to order some traps, obviously. Let's see where we're at with our chat messages. Crushed beer bottles. Okay, Freddie, what do you think about crushed beer bottles around the perimeter of your trees, as someone had mentioned in the email chat? Barb thinks that that would deter roots as well. Any feedback, Freddie? Sharon?
Well, the crushed beer bottles around the perimeter, I mean, the gophers are coming in from underneath, so if it's on the surface, it's not going to do much good. But and the roots of a tree will grow through crushed beer bottles really well. Gophers don't want to dig through crushed beer bottles, but it's, you know, I think what we used to do is make a cylinder of wire, about, you know, an 18-inch cylinder, put it in the hole, put 1 inch of broken glass in the bottom, and that would allow the roots, the taproot, to go down through the glass, but the gopher wouldn't come up, and that protected our trees really well. But it has the downside of, if you want to do something else with that piece of ground and take those trees out, you've got a bunch of broken glass that you have to get rid of. So it's got its pros and cons.
Agreed. We have a property where, I don't know where they got all that glass to break, but our place is flooded with broken glass. And
Yeah.
I strongly encourage people not to put broken glass in the ground. Our dogs have cut their feet. We're constantly picking it up. It appears out of nowhere. You know, don't do broken glass. That's my 2 cents. But,
yeah, it stays sharp. It does,
yeah,
you know, it doesn't turn into each glass.
It
Yeah.
just appears out of nowhere. It's
Yeah.
scary stuff. Patricia is asking about moles. Do they also eat fruit tree roots? She thought that
No, they
don't
don't.
eat grubs in the lawns.
Yeah, moles are meat eaters. They're carnivores. They don't eat your roots. You know, so I don't target them. I try not to kill moles. I feel bad if I kill a mole. I feel bad if I kill a gopher, but I feel worse if I kill a mole, because I feel like they're harmless.
Okay. I will discourage the dogs from hunting moles in that case. Okay, let's see. Jeremy is asking, can you set traps in the open holes versus the holes that have been filled in?
The open hole is the best hole. It's the best situation is when you've got a gopher currently working in a hole. You put the trap down it, and often it'll come back and try to do what it was doing and get into your trap, or try to fill in. And yeah, the open hole is the best. You dig out a closed hole with a shovel. That's hard work. It's not as good.
Michelle also has experience with the gopher hawk trap, and she notes that it doesn't work well in sandy soil because the burrow collapses. So good to know.
Right.
Thank you, Michelle. And Sharon notes that gopherslimited.com has a very good instructional video on how to use the cinch traps. So another resource for us all. And notes that gophers are hemophiliac. So even if they're injured by the trap, they bleed to death internally fairly quickly. Poor little things. That's sad.
That's sad.
Yeah. But she notes that if she finds one that's been wounded, she does try to dispatch it quickly if it isn't immediately killed, so that it's not suffering. Thank you, Sharon. I'm glad to hear that. Let's see. Karen is wondering about gophers and human scent. Does human scent alert the gophers to avoid the area with traps?
I never use gloves trapping gophers. People have talked about using gloves and that gophers are very sensitive, but I never use gloves, and I have a lot of success catching gophers. So maybe sometimes, but not definitely, you know, not necessarily. They're not necessarily sensitive to human scent. Sharon, what do you think?
Yeah. Oh, you're muted, Sharon.
Okay, I have not been taught. I was taught by Thomas Whitman, Gophers Limited. I have never heard him mention anything about scent. However, the fact that humans have disturbed the burrows, so the light and the extra air. Okay, gophers are very meticulous about their tunnels. So if they see that there are disturbances or the tunnels open, that will draw the gophers to the area to make things right.
Okay.
Excellent. Well, let's see. And Michelle is wondering about maintenance of the cinch traps. Do you clean them? Do you oil them? Is there any maintenance? Freddie, the same is true, I guess, for the gophinators. How do you take care of these little things?
Gophinators require no maintenance. Cinch traps need to be cleaned and oiled regularly.
Yes,
And
Mark,
that's the big.
Mark does periodically sand the wires down and oil it. I have seen at Harmony Farm Supply a cinch trap knockoff that's made with galvanized steel wires instead of steel wires. I just saw that last week. I have not used it. So that could be a potentially a better option.
And we don't do the cleaning or the, you know, sanding for rust very frequently.
A couple times a year.
For home orchard use, yeah, it's not a frequent thing. You know, if I'm putting, you know, maybe in Freddie's conditions, it would be a lot more maintenance.
Yeah, I never maintained my cinch traps. I had a dozen of them, and well, maybe they all broke except for one. You know, after a while, the rust will make too much resistance or corrosion or something, then the springs will break. So you kind of have to maintain them. Maybe once a year would probably be enough.
Okay. No, and what type of oil, Mark? Do you have a suggestion? What type of oil would you use on the traps? You're muted, Mark. Sharon, you unmute.
Okay. I just use the standard 3-in-1 oil, like a regular shop oil. You know, I'm assuming that it's not really going to get into soil or, you know, become part of your garden. So I'm not using some special oil. You know, you don't want to, you know, you want to make sure that the oil is not really stinky or fresh when you put them in the ground, because that might actually deter a gopher, that chemical smell. So, you know, we let them just sit out for a few days after they've been oiled.
I imagine even cooking oil would be fine.
Right, it sure would.
Yeah. Though that might go rancid, but
okay.
yeah. But yeah, it's mostly just so nothing special.
Okay. Sharon Corpy is asking, how effective are the box type traps?
Like the black hole trap, or I mean, they can all be effective. They can all be effective. It just I don't know. Yeah.
Is the box type trap a live trap?
This is actually Dennis, Sharon's husband. It's like a dead end trap where you plug the hole, but the trigger, as they approach the plug, they trigger it. It's like basically like a box with a loop that pops up.
Yeah, those can work. I've used those, Dennis. They're fine, but I don't have as much luck with those as I do with the gophinator. They're a little bit harder to use. You have to dig out a lot more. You can't just stick them down an open hole, for instance. You have to dig down to the burrow, almost get it flat on the ground. So yeah, they can work. They can work fine. You might do a little more work with your shovel to use that trap. But if you have them, use them.
Okay, thanks.
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah, with the cinch traps, we usually just use like a hori-hori or a small hand trowel to, you know, dig out the hole. You know, you don't need to like dig down and in and have a lot of room in there because the body of the trap is up above the ground.
Wow.
Got it. Got it.
I mean, yeah. I mean, that's unless you're going after a main run. Sometimes you find a main run and you can, you know, gophinators, you stick a trap down each direction and you can get the gopher one way or the other. But with a cinch, you can do the same thing. You can dig down. You just have to dig a much bigger hole with the cinch trap, and then you can trap a main run. But you have to do more.
Yeah.
You can't do it with a hori-hori.
Yeah, for things where we want to go both ways, yeah, either that's a lot more excavation or we try to open it up like in two spots. So we can do one kind of each way or something.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So I'm kind of curious because our dirt here is getting very hard to dig because of the drought. I was, you know, trying to dig something out the other day and it was like, well, this is hopeless. So I'm a little curious, you know, which type of trap would be easiest if you're not really terrific. I was watching you dig in the video, Freddie, and like, wow, that you're able to dig the ground. I can't dig the ground like that. So what trap is the easiest if your ground is tough to dig?
Well, I mean, generally when you're digging the gopher hole, they've done most of the work for you, right?
Yeah.
So with the cinch trap, you know, you're just trying to dig out the tunnel part, you know, and you know you're sticking your hand in there and grabbing stuff out, but you know you're trying to get the loose soil out.
Okay.
So yeah.
That's encouraging. Okay, thank you. Let's see. So Mark Mandel is asking, does it happen that a gopher would just throw dirt at the trail in the open hole to close it and avoid the trip? If so, is there any way to avoid that? Is there a way to cover the hole to make it dark?
So
I think, oh, go first.
Go ahead.
okay. So yes, that happens a lot. And all I have to do is dig it out. We find a fresh tunnel that's open and reset the trap. It may take a few times, but every single time they throw dirt on the trap, I know that there is a gopher and I was in the right place. So it's like they're staying engaged. And after they do that a few times, I think they become more careless. So I just keep engaging this back and forth dialogue with them until I get it. And gophers can see light and they can feel. They're creatures of the dirt. So I don't think you're going to fool them into believing that you haven't been there by throwing dirt in there.
And also, I like what Sharon said about, you know, just stay after him. You know, there's a gopher in there, so keep after him. But that's maybe where the bait comes in. If you put an apple or a carrot or a piece of cilantro or parsley or something in there, then maybe the gopher, I mean, I think the gopher will try to get to that food substance and trip the trap.
So the next question we have is from David, who says he has a lot of trouble with the wires between the gophinator and the stake getting tangled. Have we figured out any tricks for managing that?
I guess I don't know what he's talking about. Is it that when he carries 4 or 5 traps, the wires get tangled? Because it seems like a single trap has the wire attached to that end loop. You can tie a knot in it, and there's no reason to have it interfere with the trap at all.
Yeah, I'm referring to that. So when I carry like 5 or 10 traps in a plastic bucket, and the wires and the hooks and the garbage around the Gophinator they all tangle and become a mess and take a while to do. I'm playing with some elastic bands to try to contain it better, but I've not figured out. I know there has to be a way to do it, and I can't figure it out.
Yeah, well, I wonder if you could take I mean, I've got pipe attached to the wire that's attached to the trap. If I were to take that pipe and roll the wire up so that it was tight and not dangling loose, and then I could actually spring the trap on the pipe, it would be a single unit. The trap sprung, jaws holding the pipe, all the wire would be tightly contained around the pipe. And I think you could throw 10 of them in a bucket and they wouldn't get all tangled up.
I like that. I'll give it a try, let you know.
Okay.
Let's see, Rachel is wondering, is there ever a point where you can let up on trapping? Or do gophers have so many babies that trapping is necessary all the time? And how often do you trap?
I do a lot of trapping this time of the year. The springtime is an important time to trap because it is their major reproductive. I mean, I think they breed. It seems like they breed all year round, but I think they make more babies in the spring. And so I usually trap through June, and I let up after a while and stop because it'll just become, I'll get them under control, and then their burrows will be empty, and it'll be difficult to find a place to set a trap. So, it just becomes not worth it. So I stop, and then they move back in gradually, and I'll start seeing a problem and then start trapping again. But oftentimes, if I mow my grass in my orchard and I set up owl and hawk roosts, and sometimes those animals, coyotes, bobcats, owls, and hawks can help you control your gophers if you just take the edge off with some trapping in the springtime. You maybe get away with trapping in the spring and then trapping again a little bit in the fall, and that might be enough. But
yeah,
it depends.
Michelle is saying something that's similar to what you just said, Freddie, that she traps when she sees evidence. So, when you see the burrows, well, then you know where to put the trap. So like a pretty good rule of thumb. Thank you, Michelle.
Yeah.
All right. Anyone else have any questions they'd like to throw into the mix? All right, well, I want to toss out for the group one topic unrelated to our topics for the evening, and that is that our board is looking for someone who might be interested in taking a lead on our Green Exchange Part 2, which is our summertime plant exchange. The board is pretty occupied at this point, a little bit busy, and we're wondering if there's anyone who'd like to volunteer to help make that event happen. So if you're interested, please reach out to me and I'll be happy to share some details with you. And I'll also, of course, be sending out an email more broadly to the chapter, but since I have you here as an audience, I thought I'd toss that in. So you let me know if you're interested. Thank you so much. And other than that, I want to thank Freddie and Sharon for contributing their time to make the videos and to be on hand this evening to answer all our questions. Let's have a nice round of applause for them, please.
What's that? Yeah, and Carol, thank you so much for making everything happen, for actually feeling like this was a good idea, coming out and filming, doing all the editing, getting the word out to the people. So thank you.
Thank you, Carol.
Oh, it was actually a very interesting experience to come out to Freddie's Orchard and be with Sharon and Freddie and do this videoing. And I certainly felt like I learned a lot. I hope everyone else has learned a lot too. I've already been busy with my fruit thinning and I got to go order my traps next. So with that, I think I will say good evening to everyone. Again, thank you for being part of the chapter. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thanks, Carol.
Thank you.